I'm Teresa Moore and I'm from Buxton University and have been working with a Greener Festival for a long time now. What I'm going to talk about this afternoon is some research which is really the third time of doing, where we're turning the tables. So far this morning we've looked at the sort of supply end and the festival end, the festival organiser, festival promoter end. Now we're going to turn the tables and look at, well, what does the audience think of the various initiatives that festivals put on, try out in order to make their events more sustainable. Great, isn't it? Sorry. Frozen in time, Ben. What's happened? Oh, good. Okay. All right. Just a little bit about the research itself. I mentioned I've been working with the Greener Festival for a long time. I should give credit to Claire O'Neill, because actually the whole A Greener Festival thing and this research all came out in a dissertation she did while she was an undergraduate at Bucks. So out of that one dissertation, a whole thing has grown. So a whole raft of research and obviously a Greener Festival, which is a fantastic achievement for any undergraduate, and hopefully will inspire further undergraduates to do things. But anyway, so in 2006 she made a start on the sort of looking at the audience side of the research, and single-handedly went around to a number of UK festivals and collected data. In 2007, I was looking for a project for some of my students, and Ben Chalice, who works as visiting professor at the university, at the same time was looking for some further research. So we decided to undertake another study building on Claire's original study, which we carried out in the winter of 2007, and believe you me, it was some effort to get audience reactions to festivals in the middle of winter, when there are no festivals really to speak of. So we published our findings, and we'd taken it one step further. Claire's original research was UK based, because we just so happened to have a number of students, some from Germany, some from Finland, some from Holland. At that time we were able to translate the questionnaires and circulate them in those countries, so what was a UK based piece of research now became Northern European based, I guess is a fair summary of that. And we managed to get some country-on-country results and do a bit of comparative analysis there. Which brings us up to this latest piece. We've changed our methodology a little bit, but we've tried to keep the questionnaire as far as possible the same. And we carried this piece of research out over the summer this time of 2012. And because we did it wholly online using SurveyMonkey and our online system at the university, we went beyond Europe, so it became global. And that's because, in no small part, to the fact that the Greener Festival is now a globally recognised organisation, and we also have very strong links with Europe, who are the European festival organisers, and that extends right into Eastern Europe now, as well as Western Europe. So that's a little bit about the history of the research. We're also supported very well by the Association of Independent Festivals, who put it out on their websites. I've mentioned Europe, who put it out to their members as well. We've always tried to keep the questionnaire. Anybody who's done these, whether it's with your own festival audience or further afield, this sort of research, you want to keep the number of questions fairly short, because everybody gets bored. Well, I would certainly get bored if it was too long, so I wouldn't complete it. So 15 questions, between 10 and 15 when you're doing a piece of quantitative research is probably a good maxim, no more than 20 certainly, so we pictured it at 15. Our response rate, though, was very interesting. Suddenly we had responses from festival goers in 32 different countries. It just goes to show what a global phenomenon festivals are, and that was a really first piece of information, really interesting, just to see where all these responses were coming from. Top responding countries, and you know, I need to look at the reasons why, but just headline data. UK, we had 40% of our responses from the UK. Slovakia is the surprise there. 27% of our responses were from Slovakia. Now you might say, oh, it might be one festival promoting it or pushing it, and we did have help from one particular festival, but actually when I look at the question, which festivals do you go to, which is one of our questions, most of those respondees from Slovakia go to more than 2 festivals, so it's not just wholly one festival based. So that was in itself an interesting result. And Germany, good old Germany, Holger's not in the room here, we have a number of German students in the room, always good for responding to whatever we put out, and in 2008 we had a really good response from Germany as well, German festival goers. Just as a note of interest, other countries that responded: USA, coming more in the frame now, Canada, China, which was a bit of a surprise, Russia, well, Russia is becoming more into the festival area now, India, Turkey, Jordan, a whole range of countries that perhaps when we set out we didn't anticipate getting any responses from at all. So that was interesting in itself. Okay, methodology, just very simply, yes, I could write sort of a whole chapter on methodology, but I've tried to not bore you to tears with it, just keep it very simple. The reason why we've tried to mirror past research, and yeah, things have changed slightly, but particularly mirror 2008, is what we're trying to achieve is a longitudinal study. So we're not just looking at results 2012 or 2008, we're looking at patterns over time, and that's what's going to be of interest to us. The question is, are all the initiatives that festivals, event organisers now employing, are they having profound and long-lasting changes? Or are they, you know, we'll try it this year, it works this year, and people move on? We want to see, are there any patterns over time that we can say, yeah, the audience's attitudes are definitely changing. Longitudinal study, mixture of open and closed questions, as you would expect in this sort of analysis. We mainly use SurveyMonkey, which if you go to the top end of that particular piece of software, you can use their questionnaire tool, which helps you analyse all the closed questions. But we had a number of open questions, and that's where the really interesting stuff is coming up. And that has to be analysed on a manual basis. So I've got to go through, that's me basically, sifting through and looking at the data. A little bit about the methodology. I should say the number of responses was nearly 2,300, so that is a reasonably significant sample. So what you're going to see now are some of the headline results, if you like, where there is some significant shift between 2008, our survey then, and the current one. I've included those in the slides. What's interesting, in quite a lot of the areas, the results are very, very similar. Interesting, maybe slightly discouraging. However, there may be another reason for it in some of the areas as we go through. It may be that economics is having an impact as well. Again, it requires more analysis. So just going through some of the headline results now. Do you think festivals have an impact on the environment? Well, yes they did. And these were the results. Noise, 76.5%. Waste, and we've spent a lot of time this morning talking about waste, 87.4%. The message is getting through. CO2, 56%, about the same. Water wastage, and we'll be having a look at water a little bit later on. Just over half of the respondents thought that water had an impact on the environment at festivals. Traffic, 81%, land damage, 65%. I think what's interesting, apart from noise, is that because there's been such an emphasis on waste and traffic in particular, and a whole series of initiatives at many festivals to do with those things, that's sort of the response that you might hope for. That yes, the audience is recognising these things, and yes, those initiatives are having an impact. Noise, well, sort of speaks for itself, really. You know, the silent festival, I think there are a few silent discos around, but we haven't got a silent festival yet. Land damage is also an interesting one. That's gone up a little bit from the last time that we looked at it. I don't think, you know, that's quite a reasonable result, but I don't think there have been the level of initiatives around the damage to land at events as perhaps transport or waste. And of course CO2, 56%, just over half, is actually very similar to our 2008 result. The reason why we put that one in is when the very first survey was done in 2006, a lot of the audience didn't really understand what was meant by CO2. And so what we've seen, and carbon footprints, but what we've seen over time is that, you know, there has been a rise in the audience just understanding the language, understanding what that means. And I think that's quite important in terms of, well, some of the education work has had an impact. Separating waste, well, be interesting to see how this tallies with the individual research from the supply end that's being done. I've put the two results in because there is a significant difference in the results. So 2012, if you combine the agrees with the totally agrees, it's 86, just over 86%. Say they separate their waste. Back in 2008, it was actually just over 62%, if we take those two figures. So that is a significant change. And as we've heard this morning, or before lunch, a lot of work's been done on this. You know, a huge focus on waste, recycling, and all the efforts around that. So maybe, I will be posing the question a little bit later, maybe, you know, from the audience perspective, their perceptions have changed. They see that as something that is significant and important. What, of course, we can't say is whether those attitudes and perceptions, how much and to what extent they actually influence behaviour. And that's the gap very often. But I think that's really encouraging. It's a very significant upward trend. And I was smiling before lunch, listening to Marek talk about the Olympics, because I actually went to the Paralympics, and there's my photo of the bins, and I have to say it was absolutely spotless, the entire site. So something was working there. In terms of what that recycling means, when we dug down a little bit more deeply, 68, nearly 69% of fans supported the use of reusable cups and plates. However, and this is interesting from our point of view, that is down on 2008. So the question is, for us, why has that gone down? And we haven't really started to dig the surface of that one yet. It also runs contrary, I was interested to hear the discussion before lunch, to sort of supply end, what they're saying. So I need to understand a little bit more about why, from the audience perspective and audience attitude, that has dropped. 10% is, you know, it's worth noting that that has changed. 65.5% of festival goers would be happy to pay a deposit on reusable cups and glasses, although 17.7% would not. And I think one of the things when you're looking at this research and the sort of encouraging 2/3 of the audience want to do this, 2/3 of the audience are on board with that, you have to remember that 1/3 sometimes, up to 1/3, are not. And of course that's where you have to try and make the difference if you're going to continue developing your events and making them more sustainable. 86% supported the composting of food waste, which sort of tallies with what we were hearing right at the beginning, actually, of the day. We then move on to the sort of more of the economic type questions and what people are prepared to pay for environmental initiatives. And this is interesting in that it hasn't changed. So if we look at the 2012 results, 69, nearly 70% of fans would be prepared to pay, in this case, extra on the ticket price, public transport included in the ticket price, they'd be prepared to pay something extra. Slightly down on 2008, but not much. But what we have seen over those 4 years is that there have been increasing numbers of initiatives on transport which are to do with use of public transport, but things like Big Green Coach and a whole myriad of different schemes, both here in the UK but also in Europe, to do with train tickets and other modes of transport. So not really any change there. And I wonder, it might be a good thing that there isn't a change, because the economic environment is not having an impact in a less favourable way. But I think we need to do a little bit more analysis of that. Why hasn't that changed? The second question is, in terms of payment, sorry, just going to get my bigger slide. I can't even read that anymore. Here we go. I would accept an increased ticket price for a festival if it was for the reason of improving the environment. And this one is up a little bit. We're looking at roughly 50%. So roughly half of the audience said that they would pay extra on the ticket price if they could see that it was for improving the environment. And that was up from 41.5%. So I think that's a little bit encouraging, actually. And what was more interesting in a way is what they actually said. This is one of our open-ended questions, and we weren't expecting quite the level of written responses, but we got quite a lot of responses to support the data. So on increasing the ticket price, we asked, well, what sort of amount? What they said was not more than 15% of the ticket price. There was quite a high number who pitched it around that level, which I think is quite interesting for event organisers. Some of the European responses, and I have translated it, £1 or a couple of €2 in tax. So they'd be happy to see some sort of environmental tax on the ticket price. And it varied a little bit. Up to £5, but would need clear evidence of improvement. So yes, event organisers, you can put a tax on your ticket price or increase the ticket price, but you then have to demonstrate exactly where that money's going. Not an insane amount. It doesn't cost much to raise awareness. Well, I think we have to talk to event organisers and get their view on that. Let people know not to litter. There's a whole raft of responses, which I need to do more analysis of. And then there are a whole series of no's. No, the cost should not be passed solely to festival goers and should also be absorbed by organisers and festival traders out of their profits. And the one, I'm sorry Ben, he's not in the room, and any festival people here, They very specifically said tickets are expensive enough for some of the larger festivals. They are the price of a last-minute holiday abroad. And of course, what we have seen, we know, is that some people now, particularly in the UK, will take their holiday abroad and go to a festival abroad. So I think Exit is a very good example of that, where 20,000 or so Brits go for their holiday, but they go to a festival for their holiday because it's usually sunnier and a bit warmer in Serbia and at Exit at that time of year. So what was encouraging though was the majority of the responses were prepared to see some sort of increase, but they wanted to understand where that money was going, which I think is pretty reasonable, really. Responsibility. This is interesting. When people have got views about things, strong views about things in particular, it's interesting to see whether they count themselves in that pool of who's responsible for minimising the impact of festivals on the environment. Not surprisingly, and again not much difference from 2008, 90% of our respondees thought that it was the responsibility of the festival organiser. A little bit more broadly, a third thought it was something to do with the local authorities. But up on 2008, which I do think is also significant, is that nearly 80% of them thought that it was also down to the festival goer. And that is up on 2008, where it was 56%. So that's quite a significant shift in attitude. You know, if you're going from just over half who think, well, it's something to do with me, but actually it's a whole lot to do with the festival organiser, to, you know, we're narrowing the gap between it's all of their responsibility, but actually it's my responsibility too. And I think that's an important shift as well. What did they say? Well, a whole range of different opinions about the range of people who are responsible. Some people said the government are responsible for this and they should make a law about it. And I do know that, you know, various debates I've been to, there has been, not central government necessarily, but some suggestion about local licensing laws should not only include things on, say, health and safety and the sort of crowd management provision, for example, but should also have something in the license about environmental as well. It's a view. Artists. Well, artists are responsible. We've seen some artists come a bit unstuck on this. Yes, we know that there are some artists who are very much in tune with this and sort of live the life, if you like. But some artists have really fallen foul of this. All stakeholders, seems a fair point. Corporate sponsors, now that's an interesting one as well. They didn't say specifically how, but if you're sponsoring an event, if there's a corporate sponsor, they have the cash, they're probably adding to the problem. Let's see them take some responsibility, possibly financially. Traders, food outlets, NGO organisations, green organisations, all need to play their part. Goers should clear up, and organisers and local authorities should include it in their planning. The one thing that's missing, which I sort of wonder, you know, why, and nobody said this in their response, what about manufacturers? I'm thinking about the tent, love your tent. You know, to some extent, that is the supply chain, that's the sort of the manufacturer to retailer. Nobody is really saying at the moment that the manufacturer of the equipment of any sort has any responsibility, and I find that interesting. I don't know why, but I do find that interesting. And it may be that campaigns like Love Your Tent might start to have an impact on that. Don't know. Interesting to me. Okay, so obviously any study about attitudes then has to pose the question, well, what effect, is there a correlation between attitudes and behaviour? And in 2008 we saw quite a big gap, sort of nearly 30% gap in terms of they think one thing, the audience thinks one thing, but actually what they do is something else. And I think that gap is still quite big, sadly, in terms of, well, what do you actually do? It's one, you think that you should do this, well, what do you do? And obviously, as we saw this morning with campaigns like Love Your Tent, we wouldn't need campaigns like Love Your Tent quite so much if that gap was a lot smaller. So I think that, somehow there is still a lot of work to be done in narrowing the gap between attitudes and behaviour. And it may be on the highly visible things, which Love Your Tent again may be able to have an impact on. Just some general data now about who responded. And some of these events were quite predictable, really. Anybody who knows Melt Festival have a whole raft of initiatives at Melt in Germany, all sorts of, from solar panels to waste management to water, a whole raft of different initiatives going on there. And clearly their audience, judging by the percentage of response, is sort of in tune with this. Glastonbury had a big response from Glastonbury festival goers. It was the one festival, actually, and this is a slightly different piece of research, which had a really loyal following, where festival goers said, I only go to Glastonbury. It is the only festival I go to. The vast majority of our respondees go to, I've said, 2 or more. But where they went to Glastonbury, there were quite a percentage of those who only go to Glastonbury. Slightly aside. However, top responding, Slovakian was Poda. And Poda is a very interesting sort of up-and-coming festival. We haven't got anybody here from Poda, I don't think, today. And what I hope to do, actually, because this, the way we've organised the data, it will allow me to match the responses country by country, but also responses to festival goers. So I can identify the responses according to where the audience said they came from, country, but also I can narrow it down to actually which festivals they go to, which again will be interesting and may throw up some slightly different results. Cambridge Folk Festival, good old Cambridge Folk Festival, they did a lot to help us with this one. And Open Air Saint Gallen, I don't know if anybody knows this festival in Switzerland. They coined Trash Heroes as one of they've been working for many years again on a whole series of initiatives. And clearly they've got their audience on board as well. And just a series of links where you can find more information. Well, that's a sort of headline summary. As I said, we closed the whole thing in September, and have really just scraped the surface in terms of mining. I hate that word, mining the data. There's an awful lot of data there with 2,300 responses, and we still have a long way to go. So I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody's got any questions on what I've talked about so far. Yeah.
What did you mean by the difference between closed and open questions?
Oh, closed and open questions.
Closed and open questions.
Closed and open. For anybody engaged in research and research methodology, if you ask a closed question, it's like a yes/no answer. You limit the range of responses that you're going to get. An open one, you're opening it out, an inviting comment, if you like. And it depends what you're trying to do, but where you invite comment, you actually can glean quite a lot of interesting information that may not be what you actually anticipated. So that's what I mean. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm not sure it's actually working on 1, 2. Probably. Can you hear that, Ruth? You can.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, out of the 15 questions, how many were open questions?
5. 5 were open. Yeah. And so, as you can see, I've pulled out some what I thought might be interesting comments for you, the audience, on some of the open, but I haven't touched all of it because there is a lot. More to come later on in the year, I would say. So more, yeah.
What's the demographic of the people who responded?
Ah, that's interesting. Slightly older, actually. The largest group were from the sort of 21 to 30 age group. So slightly older in that, you know, when we do this, we're tending to think of maybe 17, 18, 24. But it was the middle age group who were the biggest responder. Is that a surprise? I don't know. Probably not, actually. Probably not. And it went right up to over 50s.
And how does that compare with 2008?
It was slightly younger, the response in 2008. What do I think about that? It's interesting, actually. I had a conversation with the environmental manager, Oya. Oya is in Norway. And she was saying to me, you know, we have to make changes, and this was a general comment about the festival itself. We have to make changes to what we do at the festival because our festival audience is getting older. And I think there are a whole series of festivals who are finding that there's a great deal of loyalty to their festival, but their festival audience is getting older and sort of growing up with them. And I know that's not uncommon across Europe. I mean, obviously there are festivals like Reading, for example, which has a much, you know, is a dedicated younger audience. But some of the festivals, their audience is sort of growing with them. What conclusions you can draw from that, I don't know at the moment. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just a quick question on your comments about possibly bringing people who manufacture some of the goods and things used at festivals. How, and this is just really a question if you think about it from your comments really, how do you think you could tie them in? Could it be purely a financial thing on sort of the clean-up operations, or could it be that it becomes their responsibility to, for instance, come and get their tents back or pick up the plastic cups? Or
yeah, I think there could be a number of responses to that. You know, if you look down the supply chain at the manufacturer, I mean, one of the ways is widening this view of stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders for an event? And if you extend it down to the manufacturer and bring them in to see more of the sort of the end result of their product, I think that's one way of doing it. I think, you know, inviting them into the Love Your Tent initiative might be other. Obviously there is a financial or a vested interest in them, certainly the tent side, not to do that because, you know, many organisations, business is founded on high volume, low margin, and obviously that's the way that tents have gone. But I think the one way is to widen the view of what a stakeholder is and include manufacturers. I highlighted it because I was just interested to observe that nobody had mentioned the manufacturer in that. Whether it's a financial penalty, whether, you know, costs are going to go up anyway, I don't know. I was very interested to hear on the waste, recycling of waste, and that idea that instead of being a customer, they're a buyer now. I think it was Marek again who said that, and there is a value in all of those products. the knock-on must at some point be that, you know, the price of all these things will go up because of the cost of those materials. I don't know. I live in hope, I guess. So those are just my sort of thoughts on the subject. But as I said, yeah.
Hi. Do you think it might be that you noticed it because it's something of particular interest to you, that in the questionnaire it's a supply and demand thing, people might have just presumed that the organisers, that the events would have chosen manufacturers that have actually have got green credentials and were already on that case?
I don't know. I don't have any evidence. I suspect it's that they didn't even think that far. I doubt whether they, you know, your average audience would think about the manufacturer, and that would be my interpretation of it being completely missing. Nobody mentioned the manufacture of tents or anything else. So I don't think that the audience thinks that far. And this is why I raised the issue about widening the stakeholder net. That, you know, we all, and from those responses, there's quite a recognition of who the various stakeholders are, from local authorities to organisers to a whole raft of people. So it's trying to then educate both the manufacturer and the audience to say, well, actually, they're a stakeholder in all of this as well. And you know, that's my view. I just don't think they've thought that far. Was it of particular interest to me, which is why I spotted it? Not really. No, I hadn't thought that far particularly. It's just something that when I was looking at stakeholders, it just occurred to me. Oh, and it's probably because I have talked about Love Your Tent quite a bit, and I've always thought about, well, so I counted myself. So I wasn't thinking about it when I was looking at those results, I have to say, but it just jumped out at me. No mention of manufacturers there. Anything else? Okay, yeah.
Perfect.
Just a couple of things. Holger, we're part of the Go group, so we've got another session coming in a month's time in April. There's information out there about it. If you're interested in waste, more on waste, we'll be doing more on that. The other thing is I'm about to embark on a slightly different piece of research with the Go group, which is this thing about, do audiences behave better in a cleaner environment? And that's partly because the other part of my job, I'm very involved in crowd management and crowd safety, and there is some anecdotal evidence that people do behave better in a cleaner environment, and there is some interest by event organisers in this, because if they do, then it will be a cost saving because they won't have to put out so much security, health and safety, etc. in those environments. So that's just a sort of headline, another piece of research we're doing. If anybody's interested in knowing more about that, please talk to me afterwards or about this. Okay, thank you very much.